Hey, Leanne. Why is that backwards? Oh, well. Oops. Ah. I'm not gonna use that. Leanne, I wanted to test my audio if you're there. You're on mute.
There, I couldn't get off mute. Yeah.
You're still on mute. I can't hear you.
No, I'm off mute on my end.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, now I can hear you. Great.
Okay.
Terrific. I couldn't figure out why my LWV was showing up backwards.
Oh, it wasn't to me.
Oh, it wasn't?
No.
Oh, okay. Then I'll put it back on. I was thinking
I'm going to choose a virtual background instead of that one because
this.
I will.
So that looks good to you? My
Yes.
back. Okay, good. Well, that's fine then.
That's good. So how many are signed up?
I don't know. I don't get that data, or I don't know where to get it. We usually get 40 people. I don't know that we'll have that many because, holidays and stuff. People are flying back from wherever they were.
So are you doing AI companion recording or what is that?
Where do you see that?
It's like closed captions at the bottom of my screen and
you can choose to do closed captions. It's not mandatory.
Okay, well, it's on my screen. I'm not sure how to do it, but
if you go to AI companion and maybe get rid of it.
Let's see.
Send in that list.
No.
Or caption.
It's not. Okay, let me see.
It's always something.
There you go. I got it.
You do the same thing every time and you get like weird results. So.
Okay.
No big deal. Okay. So you're early, as you know.
I am. Sorry.
Not a problem. We had a dropout. I had 2 people and now we have 1. Luckily, we have the more experienced senior. Oh, that's cute.
Do you like my beret or should I get
Parlez-vous français?
Rosie the Riveter?
Oh, cute.
Oh, wow.
I'm going to ask Linda to sign
Frida
it.
Kahlo. Oh, just a baby one.
Oh, cute.
I know. I was at an art show just an hour before and I wanted to see who won the awards because I was a judge for the art show.
Oh, cool.
And apparently I was the only judge for the art
show. Oh, wow.
Because I don't think every single one of mine got elected without being the only judge.
Oh my.
It was fun. Oh, I'm number 1.
Number 1.
I'm just kidding.
Where are you getting those?
They're in video filters in your video.
I probably have that too. I'm not going to play around right now, but I'll just see.
Yeah.
Video filters. I see backgrounds and effects. I have video filters. Yep. I see that.
I like that.
I usually just do blur because people don't need to see like you do. So
just play. Oh, that's cute.
So I don't think I told everybody. I spent the day with Sandra on Monday. So I was the most likely person to come down with COVID.
Oh, okay, with COVID, yeah.
So 5 days was Saturday, so I didn't really feel like I was in the clear until then. So
Mhm.
then
No,
go
I
ahead.
didn't have any symptoms. Yeah.
Well, I didn't have any symptoms, but I was we went to the museum together. So yeah.
Right. Yeah.
But I
How was
also
it? How was the museum?
crowded. Um,
Mhm.
I did have this thought because there was so much. Have you been to the main natural history one with all the stuffed animals?
If I have, it's been a
Yeah.
long time.
Yeah, I think it's geared for children. That's fine.
Yeah.
But I was thinking, since there was so much about how humanity is causing extinction, which is totally true,
Mhm.
but you would think they would be up in arms like they are CRT. It's like the poor dears can't handle the truth, right? But don't give them any ideas.
I get it.
I did have that thought as I was walking through.
Yeah.
But I liked the Air and Space Museum a lot better. Oh, good. Linda, you're joining us. There you are. Great. If you could say a few words, make sure your audio, you're on mute at the moment.
Okay, yes.
You sound great. Okay, I always like to test people's stuff, and since you don't have slides, we're all good to go.
Okay.
And I don't know how many people have signed up. Typically, we get between 40 and 70, but you don't know because people could be flying back from wherever today.
Yeah.
Anyway, nice to meet you in person.
Yeah.
And we also have Leanne, who is on our board. I don't know, like Leanne, but she's also on our board.
All right.
And so, and then we'll just let people come aboard as they choose.
Okay, sounds good. So,
Wonderful. Fallback topic is the weather. We just desperately need rain here.
well, we got
Desperately.
quite a bit of rain in the last 2 days, but it's still, the humidity is just ghastly and the temperature hasn't improved much at all.
Oh, I just meant our plants are dying.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really bad here. I'm feeling like I'm a temporary Californian. I'm in the east side of the state. So,
Oh,
well,
okay.
all who are coming aboard, welcome. We'll start straight up on the hour.
All righty. Well, I'll be back. I'm going to go bury my
Oh, sure. We
phone.
just wanted you to test your audio, Linda, and you've done that, and that's fantastic. Thank you.
Alrighty.
See you soon.
All right.
I just read a fantastic book, Thinking of Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, who's a famous, I guess you'd call him a psychologist. Anyway, it's about decision making and how we have a system that acts quickly, makes snap judgment, has some virtues, but a lot of, not such great virtues. We don't take the time to think through things. That's being overly simplistic, but there are all kinds of framing effects and anchoring. I mean, all these things that we do. Fascinating book, highly recommended.
What is the name of it again?
I believe it's Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel. I think it's Kahneman. If I'm probably not getting that exactly right, but if you look up Thinking Fast and Slow, I think you'll find it. It's really, really excellent. I want to get a shorthand of all of the different, because there were so many, it was hard to remember them all. But I always like to share books that I think are particularly terrific. It's just helpful when you're thinking, how can they possibly think that? To have some, reasons why people think the way they do. So it's helpful. It's
in this
calm
day and
down.
age, it has been,
Yeah, it's
it-
like, how did that? why
it's
do that?
been very difficult. Where, you think now for the past 60 years, we have shared the same values,
Pretty much.
but something has gone astray.
Yep. Sure. For sure. And it's tough for the League of Women Voters. I mean, it's advantageous that I like to say, rigorously nonpartisan. I mean, we are nonpartisan. So, because that gives us license to say things that are true, that are not based upon a political affiliation. But we get suspected of being partisan because we say things that are true. Ooh, did I just say that?
Yes, yes.
Tough. It's tough. But I love the organization. I was just at the national convention and it was terrific. Terrific.
I'm so glad it was a good one. I'm so
Well, it's
glad.
the only first and only I've ever been to. And we were in Washington, DC. So, so that was interesting. And it gives me renewed respect, Linda, for all you election officials. Everything you do, which I already had high regards anyway. So I'm truly not sure how many people will be here because it is following up on a holiday weekend. But if it's just us, we do record it and we can share it more broadly and encourage people to have a look and say that, because it'll be interesting and valuable learning for folks, regardless. We've been doing these monthly, the state level. I think there's some local teams who do their own things, like hot topics and whatnot. But we've been doing these webinars, I think since September last year. One of the most, and you can see them on our Facebook. You can go back and look at them. For instance, we did utterly fascinating one on the Electoral College. You think you know things, right? And then you learn so much more. So I'm planning one, and I'm open to topics anyone give me, because I'm doing one on book banning, I think, coming up. Doing one on open government. We did one on education. Anyway, it's a series and we welcome people's input if anyone wants to have a particular topic they'd like us to look at, to do so.
I do have a question. So are these going to be state to state laws that we're reviewing?
We're looking at Tennessee laws. Now, that doesn't mean that they don't reflect other places, but we're focused on Tennessee. A little bit different than we sometimes do our webinars, which we will take a national view, sort of drill down to the state. Here, we thought we would just focus on Tennessee. Because we have a couple of new laws that have come into effect.
We do.
And we won't talk about the ones that did not get passed. That's won't go there. Don't need to.
Yeah, there was a lot of bad law defeated this year. So.
I mean, there often is, and there's good laws that don't get passed, and then there's laws that just don't get figured out in time. You probably all know about the caption bill. They'll just put something in, and they just have to put something in paper and log it, and then they sort of fill it in later. That's a very simplistic way to look at it, but you don't know what it is.
Yeah.
And that gives them time to do the homework and other things to put it together. But sometimes laws just don't get done in time. It's like we have 2 LWV of Tennessee. Debbie, is that you? I'm trying to figure out who the LWV. I'll change mine. That's what I'll do. No, you can always change your name.
Got it. Yes, it's me, and I will change my name.
I'm gonna change your name. Okay, I'll leave mine as LWV, or we can both change it.
No, feel like and hello, Linda. Good to see you.
Yeah, nice to be here. Thank you.
Gail, it looks like you're having a little trouble connecting to audio. It's been trying for a while. You might want to sign out and sign back in. Unless you're connected now. You can also use the chat to send us questions. Oh, good. Looks if if it doesn't work for you. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another of our League of Women Voters monthly seminars or webinars. This evening, we're going to be looking at election laws in Tennessee. We're focused on Tennessee. Just a couple of housekeeping items. We'll keep you all muted. Please do write down your questions. We'll have a Q&A session at the end. We'll have a vigorous discussion. I'll introduce our guest in just a minute. You can write down questions in the chat and we'll monitor that, or you can save them at the end and a signal that you would like to ask a question either by raising your literal hand or your virtual hand. We are recording this and we will be posting it on our social media so other people can see it. I would also encourage you, if there's any particular things you learn, to share with your friends and family. So let's meet our guest. Linda Phillips began her tenure as the administrative leader of the Shelby County Election Commission in May 2016, when she relocated from Lafayette, Indiana. She has been a lifelong voter. I bet you have lots of other lifelong voters here tonight, and has never missed voting in an election. She says she believes voting is the most important thing citizens can do, and we agree with her, because it is their most fundamental right as Americans. Phillips earned a Bachelor of Science degree in Consumer and Family Services at Purdue University. She went on to earn a Master of Science in Management also at Purdue. She began her career in elections in the early 1990s as a poll worker in Tippecanoe County, Indiana. In 1999, Phillips went to work in that county as a member of the Board of Registration. Later, she was promoted to co-director of the Tippecanoe Board of Elections and Registration. After serving for several years, she was elected clerk of the courts, the chief election officer in Indiana. After leaving Tippecanoe County government, Phillips took a job at an international election company working on elections all over the U.S. and in Canada. Since she joined the Shelby County Election Commission, she has improved security internally and externally, and the chain of custody process. She introduced a new expanded public test of election equipment. Additionally, she has expanded the outreach programs at the Election Commission, frequently giving informational classes about voting to many age groups throughout the county. We're really, really pleased that Linda took time out of this busy election season to spend time with us talking about our election laws in Tennessee this year. We agreed, Linda and I, that rather than have Linda do a presentation, we would do some questions. And I'll be asking those, and at the end, you all can ask questions too. But we're just going to start with a couple of election laws that I think we're all familiar with, but we'd like to know more. We're going to start with bona fide member of a political party. The background of this was passed last year and went into effect this past May, just in time for the primary. It mandates that a sign, a physical sign that's 8.5 by 11 with a yellow background, and it's very specific, in bold black text, must be posted that says this. I'm reading it exactly. It's the law. Please read. It is a violation of Tennessee Code annotated section blah, 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 and punishable as a Class C misdemeanor under Tennessee Code annotated section blah, 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 if a person votes in a political party's primary without being a bona fide member of or affiliated with that political party, or to declare allegiance to that party without the intent to affiliate with that party. Okay. The officer of election at each polling place shall ensure that the signs prescribed by subdivision is posted in a prominent, highly visible location within the polling places. So that's the law that we've been living under this year. And I'm sure you will share some questions that I have. What questions, Linda, have you received from voters about this sign?
Well, actually, Shelby County is a little different than the rest of the county. Most of our districts are very tightly drawn. So frankly, doing strategic voting in a primary wouldn't make any difference whatsoever. The bulk of the races are decided in the primary. Now, the other thing that strikes most of us election administrators as being slightly humorous about this bill is that no one reads the signs. I once sat in a polling place just observing. I was timing voters, but I just, for giggles, spent another hour in there watching to see how many voters looked at the 60 square feet of signs that we are required to post. The answer was 0. So, it probably does make some difference to some politician somewhere, but it's not it's not well defined, and we haven't had very many questions about it.
Terrific. How does your election team, or who defines, because this is the question we've been talking about, how do you define bona fide for voters?
Well, that's a very difficult one because it isn't defined in state law. So we generally tell people if they have a question, and again, we don't get a lot of those questions, is that they need to, they should follow, what they believe right now. So, and, I'd really love to see some definitions. Some states that I've worked in define members of a party as, who will you be supporting in the general election? The majority of the candidates that you'll support in the general election is the primary you should be voting in. So, but that's not the case in Tennessee. And the one thing election administrators want is clarity. We'll follow the law, but you gotta tell us what it is.
So since you see people not observing the sign, I would think my next question, which is, have you observed or suspected anyone not voting because of the sign? I would suspect the answer is no.
No, we really have not observed that kind of behavior here.
Yeah, good. What is the election commission, your election commission's view of its enforceability?
I don't know what their position on that would be, frankly. The issue just has not come up. As I said, because our districts are so lopsided, it would take, 60% of the population switching parties to make any difference.
That makes sense. I think a lot of our districts in Tennessee are like that. Well, we made quick work of bona fide voters. I'm going to move over to the question on third-party organizations registering voters. And this law applies to people like the League of Women Voters and NAACP and others, applies to people collecting voter registration forms. And Linda, by the way, if I ever don't say it exactly how you understand it, don't wait to the end, correct me.
Okay.
Please do that. It requires that the election forms be turned in within 15 days to the Election Commission in the county where the registered person lives. It prohibits providing any information on the form prior to giving to the person to be registered and may not be altered after the fact. It requires third-party organizations to register with the Election Commission and provide detailed information about their organization. Each individual engaged in voter registration must affirm they have not been convicted of a felony. That all sounds, reasonable. Then it says, violation has civil penalties of $50 for each violation and $5,000 for each violation for some aspects of this legislation. And I didn't go into the detail on that, but that's a pretty hefty fine, seemed to me. So, question: have you in Shelby County seen any decrease in third-party organizations doing voter registration? And maybe it's too soon to tell, but have you seen
the bulk of the voter registration by third parties tends to come in the fall before a general election. So far, no, we've not seen any real decrease. In fact, we've actually seen a slight increase in the number of people who are registering. The other thing I would say, though, is that in general, we do a pretty decent job of registering voters in Tennessee. Our problem is that we don't get them out to vote.
Amen.
So, I did some calculations based on some numbers I got about the number of people who were citizen age population who had not been convicted of a felony, and we were approaching 90% of them were actually registered. But, again, as we all know, just being registered isn't enough. You've got to actually get them out to vote.
Absolutely. So it's because it's early, I suspect you've not really heard from third-party organizations looking for clarity about this particular law? Anyone calling you and asking any information?
Well, we haven't really, because this was passed in 2019, and the bill that was just enacted, which was Senate Bill 2586, this turned out to be Public Chapter 871, was really just, it clarified two things. It, before, when maybe turned in, there was nothing to define what date the voter had done it. So now the law has clarified that the date that the voter put on the form is presumed to be the date that they signed it, and that's when the 15-day clock starts ticking. But then the other part, the major part, the only real change was there were some organizations that tended to pre-fill forms. They put names and addresses. That, of course, is not, not legal now. They can still mail the forms to the voter and hope that the voter fills them out. But that's really not, that's just the change to this. So the training, the requirements to register are not new.
So the feeling is that this solved a reasonable problem, and to not have people pre-fill the registration forms, that this law has some common sense aspect to it.
It depends.
Okay.
Some people take the position that it's not, that if organizations want to help people fill out forms, that's fine. Some don't. It's just kind of where you are on the political spectrum. I kind of like the pre-filled out forms because you could read them.
Well, there's that. Any of us who've worked in the back room trying to decipher that stuff would share your opinion. All right. The next one's a little bit more obscure, I suppose, but there's a financial disclosure requires political campaigns to report contribution and expenditures for local elections to registry of election finance rather than the local county. I mean, there's several bills, not just about election bills, but there's sort of a running theme of removing local authority on some aspects, and this seemed to sound a little bit like that.
Well, actually, this was kind of an interesting bill, and I would say the majority of election administrators were in favor of it. It doesn't change how local candidates report. An individual candidate committee still reports to the county election commission. They file their reforms with us, and then we process them. A few counties, of course, have a public website. We do. When we get campaign finance forms, we publish them to a site, shelbyvote.com, and then you can go to candidates and find all of the local. What this did do, though, was change multi-candidate committee, or political action committees is what they're commonly called. They now file with the state. What would happen before is that if a state committee chose to give to a local candidate, they'd have to file with us, and they'd have to file in every county where they contributed. So if you contributed to a candidate, it was running in a district that crossed counties, you'd file both places. Most of the large political action committees are pretty sophisticated, and they would call and they would ask us questions that we had absolutely no idea how to answer. So we'd have to send it to the state anyway. So, it's just really, and it was not a huge workload for the state. And so now PACs only have to file one place. So I'm kind of okay with that, because the state is very extreme.
Yeah,
they
extreme
have a very good website.
Okay, that makes sense. Well, those were a few of the bills I wanted to call out specifically, and then I know you have some others you want to bring up. And before we do that, I had a few other questions that I thought our group might like to hear your point of view on. First is, what advice would you give to poll watchers so that they may make meaningful contributions? I think various ones of us have been poll watching, and gosh, it's a little bit like watching paint dry. You're waiting for something exciting to happen. But how can we make meaningful contributions, Linda, as a poll watcher?
Well, the two most critical times in the day of an election are before the polls open. So watching to make sure that the zero reports are run and that they are truly zero and that the seals match. that's, that's a valid activity. During the day, I mean, there's really not a whole lot to watch. So it's yeah, it is. It's a lot like watching paint dry. And the other time when it's kind of important to be there is to watch the polls close. One of the things you can observe is whether or not every voter that's in line. Now, a voter that's in line when the polls close is allowed to vote. A voter that's racing across the parking lot when the polls close is not. But just making sure that those voters are allowed to vote, and then watching the closing process, because those are the two most critical times. Making sure, of course, that the counts on the machine match the number of people that signed in. Although I will tell you that in every single election I have ever been involved in, there will be someone who signs in and then goes to a voting machine and decides not to vote. Now, if your poll workers are, on top of it, they can sometimes then remove that person's name from the list or write did not vote on it. But if it's a busy polling place, that may not happen. So the thing to look for is to make sure that there are no more votes on the machine than there were people that signed in. But if there's fewer votes on the machine than the number that signed in, that's not a crisis. That's just human behavior.
That makes sense. Speaking of poll workers, how's it going this year? Are you getting where you are? I know it's different every place. Are you getting a good supply of poll workers? Are you finding that up or down or any kind of trend?
We actually, I think in Shelby County, we have something of an advantage over a lot of counties, because a couple of years ago, I pitched a polite hissy fit and explained to people that you don't get a whole lot when you offer them $100 for a 14-hour day. So we pay close to $15 an hour for poll workers. Our early voting workers are paid $18.05 an hour. So in general, I don't have trouble finding poll workers. College students will cut class for $250. So we have a pretty good supply. We do have problems, of course. This is Shelby County. It's primarily urban, of getting a sufficient balance between the parties. Our goal is to have an equal number of each party at each polling place. Our reality is we're lucky if we have one or two. And I think in many other counties in the state, that's the opposite problem. They have a surplus of the other party and they struggle to find Democrats. So, but no, so far we've not seen anything. Tennessee, of course, is reliably going to vote Republican. And so I think we've been spared some of the silliness that election administrators in other counties have had, other states have had to deal with. We are not a swing state. We're never going to have be a swing. Well, I'm not saying never. For the foreseeable future in my career, I don't see us being a swing state.
I'm going to counter my thought earlier, and I think because of the nature of our conversation, when there's a relevant question, we're just going to take it. And there is one right now from Judy Whitehill. Has the Shelby County Election Commission passed a poll watcher policy? If so, was it using the language T&Co annotated 2.7.104?
Yes. Well, we haven't passed a policy. Our commission believes that when you have a law, you follow the law. It's not up to them to reiterate it. But yes, we do treat poll watchers, as is applied by law. So they have to be nominated by, a candidate or an organization interested in the purity of elections.
Do you find people get confused about what is particularly the second definition? Do you find people know what that means?
I think the organizations that are really legitimate understand it just fine. The League of Women Voters got it down pat. So.
Oh, yes. Glenn, it looks like, has a question. Glenn, you can unmute yourself. Let me see.
Okay. Up here in Washington County, several of us, I nominated several of us to be poll watchers, and really almost at the invitation of our election administrator. And then she came back and said, I'm so sorry. nowhere in your league mission and bylaws does it say, magic words like election security. And she said, I know that's what you're all about, but it doesn't say it. So I think Debbie's going to help us get that taken care of. But we were quite taken aback, as was she. She was stunned. She'd been all over our website, the state website. She even went to the national website. She said, I know you're about it, but you don't say the words. So is that happening anywhere else except in?
I'm not hearing it here. I mean, if somebody
Good.
came to me with that interpretation, I'd laugh at them.
I want to reassure Robin that yes, we did talk about the law about being bona fide, and you're certainly welcome to rewatch the video, but there was Linda was explaining that it hasn't had much impact because people, well, for a few reasons, not least of which is people don't read signs. So, but it's not to make light of it, but it has certainly not been a problem in Shelby County. Do people in your location know about and welcome the change to election centers?
Well, no. I was one of the people that pioneered vote centers or election centers in Indiana. We're one of the first counties to do it. And I wrote the plan that they actually still use today. And so I love vote centers. I'd be happy to have them, but the way the Tennessee law is written, it would require both parties, I can't remember the exact percentage, to support the idea. And frankly, since they can't agree on what day of the week it is, I just don't see that happening in Shelby County. The other problem is that vote centers they are more difficult in urban areas, because we have some areas of of the city of Memphis where we don't have the kind of buildings that you need for vote centers, because you need a building that's pretty large, that's not affiliated with a school, and it has plenty of parking. And there's just in some areas of and it has to be completely ADA accessible, and it has to have internet that we can either gloam into or, bring in ourselves. And there's just some parts of the county where that just doesn't exist. So I don't think vote centers are likely to happen in Shelby County anytime soon.
I live in Blount County, and it's that problem with their real rural areas. So yes, that's a problem for some places, and it's a great convenience for others. So
yeah, and it is possible, actually. I mean, we ran vote centers in Indiana in areas that had no internet, but you just open a phone call back to the office and they check them in. So, you can do it without internet. But again, it's a little more complicated and a little more expensive. But on the other hand, we run 142 election day polling places. If we could cut that back to 70 or so, it'd be great. But like I said, the political reality and the physical reality of the community just makes that pretty impossible.
makes sense. Are there any additional protections that your office is planning to protect against voter intimidation?
Well, we do train our poll workers in intervention, calming situations down. We have actually on occasion removed people. We have had some pretty aggressive poll watchers who try to intimidate voters. We don't put up with that. We send the sheriff to remove them. So we have a pretty good policy on intimidation. As I said, we are doing some additional training for security, about security. We're doing a lot of things I'm not going to talk about because
of course,
we have done some, we've taken steps. We're working with local agencies to make sure that our polling places are protected.
That's great. You had brought up to me the law that is having people election information not just posted in local newspapers, but also on online media.
Yeah, that was a law that kind of surprised me. And it
Mm.
doesn't apply just to elections, but it does expand the avenues with which we can post legal notices. There are a lot of newspapers that are really, frankly, no longer publishing paper editions, and that's the only thing under Tennessee law that we were authorized to place notices in. So this actually expands it. It sets some standards for what websites you can post on. It has to be published continuously for more than a year. It has to update at least 3 times a week. More than 50% of the content has to be local news. So it can't just be an amalgamation of it can't be directed at, it has to be general news. It has to be a website that's supporting journalistic standards. So, the far right-wing crazy vampire website would not be a suitable place to put it. But we do have, some local websites that would be a good way to reach voters that don't subscribe to paper newspapers anymore. And it doesn't apply, as I said, it applies to more than just elections. It's all legal notices that have to be published.
I know there's some people who are concerned that that's going to further the demise of local newspapers who maybe don't have it, who, want to maintain their print piece, but, such is the way.
I don't think so, because it doesn't remove the requirement to post, in the paper of record. It just expands. So I would have liked to have found out about this bill before I submitted my budget for fiscal year 25, but hey,
Sure.
We'll make it work.
You brought up a couple of other bills, which are, let's see, SB 1967, which changes the deadline to receive absentee applications.
Yes, that was a little controversial in some ways. Right now, the deadline to receive an absentee application is 7 days before the election. And this bill would change that deadline to 10 days before the election. What we found when the Postal Service changed their standards in, I think it was 2019, maybe 2017, lengthening the amount of time they had to deliver mail, that's made it virtually impossible. If we mail a ballot out on the 7th day before the election, there's almost no chance that we're going to get that back before election day without somebody spending time, energy to FedEx it or send it by some other service. What we found was that 85% of the ballots we mailed on the 7th day before the election didn't make it back to us in time. And so, there was people that said, well, no, you're making it harder for voters. And I said, no, because what happens in the 7-day deadline is that we're letting voters think that they're going to be able to vote when realistically they're not, unless they want to FedEx that back to me. So now this does not take effect until after the November election, the 7-day deadline, because you don't want to change anything in a particular election cycle. But if you get questions about it or you're contemplating voting absentee, I would urge you to get it at least 2 weeks. 10 days at a minimum, but 2 weeks is better.
Thank you. I want to pause for a second because Maureen has a couple of questions, but I do not see them in the chat, Maureen. So you said you had a couple of questions, but I've been scrolling here and I'm not seeing them. So maybe you'd like to unmute and ask your questions.
Okay, thank you. I sent them as a direct message to Linda Phillips. I don't know what happened.
Oh, okay. I said I would monitor the chat, so Linda's off the hook.
Okay. First of all, just quickly, does the state information collected about campaign financing, does it have access to the public?
Yes. The state and some of the counties actually have public-facing websites where you can review the campaign finance filings. Now, then that includes everything filed with the state is available, and everything filed in Shelby County you can see as well.
And the other question is regarding: is your office able to take any initiative to help people with a history of a felony conviction to get their voting rights back?
We do have classes on that, and we do public presentations for groups. But in a large part, we delegate that to other organizations. We have some organizations in Shelby County that are very active in that arena. And frankly, they have more resources that they can devote to it than we do. So, as I said, we do have information available. We go out to speak to groups on the topic. But,
Thank you.
Terrific. Linda, you brought up a program I'm not familiar with, so I'm going to learn something too. What is the emergency hospital voting program?
Okay. Well, a voter who finds themselves unexpectedly or even expectedly in the hospital between 20 days before the election, which would be July the 12th, or all the way through 7 a.m. on election morning, can call and ask for the services of the emergency hospital voting team. And we will send a team, one Democrat, one Republican, to the hospital with the voter's ballot. Now, you do have to arrange it in advance. You have to call us and tell us, the name and the address of the voter. And we usually vote, in a presidential election, we'll vote several dozen voters there. It's particularly popular in rehab hospitals because they don't qualify as nursing homes. And so we try to make sure that the hospital administrators know about that. But, if you have family members or, you learn of somebody in your church that's been hospitalized unexpectedly, and they want to vote, every county is obligated to help them. So.
Terrific. I think I vaguely knew that, but I didn't know any of the particulars, and I guess I didn't realize how it was mandated and stuff. So thank you for sharing that. You wanted to also bring up that voters who have low vision or print disability vote on an accessible ballot using their computer and screen reader. You also mentioned you don't have a lot of details, but you wanted to flag this for folks.
Yeah, it's a new bill, and we used it fairly successfully during the pandemic under the emergency election part of the law. This bill will make it possible for voters who either, don't read or they are, have low vision. They can apply for a print disability ballot that will then be emailed to them. And the screen reader, apparently most voters, with low vision have screen readers, will read the ballot to them. They can make their selections. Now, that still has to be printed and mailed back to us, but that will take effect for the November election. Mm-hmm. So we expect some details on that.
And that's a very good thing. Last thing that you referenced to discuss was that August and November elections are the first time that implement the audits required by the Tennessee Voter Confidence Act. You might want to spend a minute telling people about the Tennessee Voter Confidence Act.
Okay.
And the audits that are involved.
Yeah, well, it's going to be very interesting. The first time it will happen will be in August. The Secretary of State will select randomly, they will select several counties and then decide whether they will do a tabulation audit or they will do what they're calling a risk limiting audit or what they are calling a process audit. And so those counties that are selected by the Secretary of State will do one of those three. Now, what they're calling a risk limiting audit is I'm calling it a hand count because that's really what it is. So if you're a tabulation audit county, you'll select, depending on your size, three absentee precincts, 3 election day precincts, and 1 scanner from an early voting location. And you will take those paper ballots and scan them on a different machine and see if the results match. Mm-hmm. They will match. The interesting one, of course, is the risk limiting audit, as I said, which is the tabulation audit. That will require a team to count the top race on that ballot in that precinct by hand. They're only counting the top race and to make sure that they match.
Mhm.
Uh, Again, if they're machine marked ballots, they will match. Um, where you run into problems is hand marked ballots. Machines may not interpret marks on a hand marked ballot exactly the same way people do.
Mhm.
So if you're using hand marked ballots, then that could generate some difference. It won't be much, but it could happen. So then the rest of the state, the ones that are not selected by the uh, Secretary of State's office, will either do a tabulation audit or they will do a performance audit. And a performance audit is a very detailed look at essentially all of the paperwork associated with the election. So starting with, I've got a 11-page list of things that we would be checking for. Now, we typically do most of this already. We just don't put it together in one neat place for people to look at. And we're still trying to wrap our minds around. Our test decks are 12,000 ballots, so we're trying to figure out how that's going to be available to be inspected if you're selected for that. Most counties will be doing a tabulation audit, which again isn't just you select a number of precincts. On election evening at 7 p.m., the election commission of that county will randomly select. We're drawing little slips out of a hat. And so then they will retabulate those. So if it's an early voting location, they'll retabulate one scanner on a machine that was used in election day. An election day machines would be retabulated on an early voting machine. Your hand marked ballots, your absentee ballots would be marked, they'd be read on one other machine used in the election. So it's just, it is now that virtually every county in Tennessee has paper backup. It's just a way to assure people that our elections are well run, and they are. We put a lot of time and effort into making sure that everything is safe and secure. I mean, we're redoing our warehouse right now. We're adding more security features. That was another interesting law that I didn't meant to ask. In the last session, the coordinator of elections was also granted the authority to set standards for security for election commissions. So that's a change. I think we've had security in place for a very long time. If there's high resolution cameras on our equipment 24/7, we use a lot of electronic tagging in addition to our physical written chain of custody. But yeah, it's going to be interesting. I don't know that we're going to have, I don't know what the audit will be. I will tell you those my experience is that the only ballots that ever change are hand marked.
Sure. And what might happen if I suppose there's some kind of acceptable tolerance, but if something goes beyond that, what might be the outcome?
Then if it goes beyond that, the tolerance, which I believe is 2%, but it might be 1%. I can't really remember at the moment. Then you expand the audit to additional precincts. So.
Okay. Well, that all sounds reasonable, and I think it gives further confidence in our election is a good thing. So even if it creates more work for you and your team, though, it sounds like potentially.
Well, a little bit, but it's not for like the performance audit. That's the one that scares me. It's not that we don't do everything that is required, but it's just, my warehouse covers close to an acre, and there's stuff stored all over the place. So trying to pull it together and get it, in one spot where it can be available for public inspection is going to be a little challenging.
Well, thank you. That was interesting and valuable. I think there are some comments or questions about having people work less time because it's sort of a lot of the people who do volunteer are older. And is there any consideration for half-day shifts and things like that?
We have considered half-day shifts, and I, again, it is possible. A lot of people who cannot work a 14-hour day are perfectly willing to work a half day. The realistic problem for us is that increases the number of people that we have to train. Right now, we run training classes 6 days a week, 3 classes a day for 6 weeks. And in our current facilities, that's pretty much the maximum number of people we can train. So I like the idea, and I'm not opposed to it, but it's just the practicality of it is a little difficult. So
That makes sense. Those of you who have questions that you haven't put in the chat, or if we've missed a question that you put, please raise your hand, either this one or the virtual one. So, because we really love Linda being with us, so we want to maximize our this opportunity. Who else has any questions? Or comments, for that matter? Other than thank you, Linda, for all the hard work you do. Debbie has a question.
Yeah, so I know that frankly, Tennessee hasn't had problems that other states have, but have you heard anything from poll workers who have concerns about their own personal security in that job? And if so, what do you do to make them feel more comfortable?
Well, most of what we've heard from poll workers about security is that they're uncomfortable arriving at their polling place in the pitch black and leaving in pitch black. So we work with local law enforcement to provide escorts. You know, we tell them to leave as a group and wait until their escort gets there. And then, so, you know, there's a uniformed officer in the parking lot waiting for them to go to their cars. We do training. As part of our training, we talk about security and what, you know, some of the things they should watch for and how to de-escalate, and when is enough de-escalation and you just call for 911. So we do touch on that.
It's reassuring.
Oh, and I do have one other question. And I don't know if we're past that era now, but you may remember several years ago, there was a big deal about people taking selfies of themselves voting. You remember that?
I do.
Are we past that now where people are not fooling with that, or is that still an issue for you?
We haven't seen a whole lot of it recently. I mean, God bless Justin Timberlake. He's the one that set it off. And I'd been here about 4 months. I'm like, what? And I raised boys, so I didn't even know who Justin Timberlake was. Not my finest moment. But we kind of try to overcome that, if you will. There's no prohibition for election officials from taking photos. So in particular, we have signs and selfie frames at our polling places outside of the room where voting is occurring. One says, "I'm a first-time voter," and you know, they'll hold, if the voters holds it up, if we're not slammed, we're happy to take their picture, but being very careful not to show any ballots in the background. And then people are welcome to take the selfie frames out in the hallway and take their own pictures, but we really haven't had any trouble in the polling places.
We have a question from Maureen. Where are we with giving people in line water or anything else?
Well, we work very hard not to have lines. So, you know, I tweet out where there's no lines at early voting. And I have a pretty good algorithm that enables me to predict how many people are going to be in line. And I frankly try to hold it to 10 minutes or less. I find 15 to be acceptable. And we very rarely, if ever, exceed that. So, but you can't offer anything. You can't offer a voter anything of value to vote and I've never seen anybody try to pass out water in our lines. But again, we don't really usually have major lines.
Mhm.
We had a bit of it on the first day in 2020 in the pandemic when everybody wanted to vote and get back home. We had lines longer than I would have liked, but other than that, it's really.
Have you, do you anticipate having any issues with people wearing candidate paraphernalia?
We have had some problems with that in the past. But, we explain to them that, they need to either turn the t-shirt inside out or um, just that they can't come in with that on. And most people are pretty understanding about that. Zip up your jacket or take your hat off. And, polling place is neutral. So,
Leanne, you have a question? Unmute yourself, please.
Yes. So my question is, I work the polls too, and what if your poll workers wear religious clothes and clothes that aren't appropriate?
well, I would make them go home and change.
Well, what
we're
if you're not in charge? It's the person in charge.
yeah, then at that point I would call the election administrator and we'll deal with it.
Yeah, I know you can't, but it's since people, I thought there was a law that in Tennessee you could offer a half day. I think it is in the annotated code that it's available.
It is available.
How do election commissions decide whether they want to or do not want to? Because I hear the same thing from our election commission saying, oh, our training is never packed. First of all, there's always room for training, and people really want to work that half day, especially the older people that I work with there. They really want the half day or they're going to not work at all. So why don't we give them that option? Because I don't think I haven't seen that it could be an issue of training. You need so many more people to train.
Well, again, I think that varies county by county. I
do too.
don't
I
have
agree.
the space, but
Yeah.
there is an argument to be made that at least some of the people that are at the polling place need to be there all day to ensure the continuity from start to finish. So
Well,
I don't
isn't
think,
that the poll officer's job?
well, yes, but I think you need somebody from each party to be there all day long. And when I set up vote centers, we did shifts in Indiana, and that worked fine. But I made sure that there were two people there, the officer and the chief deputy officer, that were there all day long, because you do want to be, if you get sued, to be able to hold up your hand and say, hey, this was under the control of, one Democrat, one Republican all day long. So if, you think that people would want to work that, I can understand why. I will employ 1,800 poll workers on election day. And if I upped that to say 2,800, that's 2,800 checks I have to mail out as opposed to, and so finance would have a screaming hissy fit. There's a lot of issues that would need to be decided, but I think it would be something, if you're not getting satisfaction from the election administrator, I would talk to the individual election commissioners and see if that's a policy they want to set. Because it's the election commission's function to set the policy and the administrator to follow it.
Okay.
Do you hear much from folks about voter fraud?
Real voter fraud? No. Suspected voter fraud that doesn't exist? Yes. There's just a mob of people that somehow think vast numbers of non-citizens are voting in our elections. I don't find that to be the case.
And do these questions come directly? Do you have to field those questions, Linda?
Yes.
Yes.
We've got a cadre of people that come to every election commission meeting and raise non-existent issues. So,
Well, You deserve some combat pay for it. This has been really interesting. I don't see any other questions. Last opportunity, anyone? Ask a question, make a comment. Otherwise, I think we should end with,
One more.
wait, one more. Leanne has a question.
Who votes on how much you pay your election workers? Who sets that? Is it the election commission? Is it because you pay more than what we pay?
Well, it's set actually in the budget process. Our election commission presents a budget to the county commission, which passes it. And,
So
I have to do a
County
budget.
commission.
I have to make it, and it passed. If it passes, then their pay is raised. Now, our early vote workers are Shelby County employees because of the number of hours they work and the amount of money they get paid. So they're actually on payroll, and their minimum wage is set by the county commission under their living wage ordinance. So.
Okay, thank you. I just.
All right,
county commission.
everybody. I'd like everyone, if you would, to please give some applause and gratitude for Linda spending this time with her depth of experience and really appreciate it. And thank you everyone for attending. This has been a very interesting session. We appreciate the League of Women Voters, appreciate you being here. Thank you, everybody.